Hi, and welcome to how to make a basic character rig for animation. So before we get started, we're going to talk about a few things that I want you to remember before you actually start rigging. The first of these things is we're going to be doing a T-pose for the character, and that's because it's the easiest to rig. And there's a lot of options. You'll see rigs where the character's arms are out at 45 degrees and the legs are out in sort of an A pose, and that's great. But in this case, we're going to stick to T-pose because when you're starting out, it keeps the joint chains very clear and it's an easy way to go. Your models need to have thoughtful topology to deform nicely when animated, and the way to think about this is a good rig isn't going to save a model that's messed up. So make sure, look at your model, make sure that the topology is working on it, make sure that everything is kind of sealed up and exactly as you want before you start to rig it. One after that is we're going to keep the limbs and the fingers in your model spread out enough so that they don't cause issues when painting skin weights. And this is because when you set up the skin weighting, you're going to see that the model won't know which part to weight to which bone if things are too close together. So keep that in consideration when you're making your model. Also, you're going to have to make sure that your model is correctly sized, zeroed out, and placed on the origin before starting your rigging. So basically, just kind of look at it, make sure it's the right size, labeled correctly, your transforms are frozen, everything's just exactly as you want it before you start to rig. Remember about inverse kinematics and forward kinematics, also known as IK or FK. Setting up the bones is just the first step to building a functional rig. And what I mean by that is you're going to need a lot more than just bones. So a lot of people will just get the bones and call it a day. And that is actually just the very first step of making a rig that's going to work for you. All right, so we're going to start off with a demo. And the first thing that I do is I'm going to go into Windows Outliner. You're going to see I'm going to shut this and I'm going to go to Windows Outliner and I'm going to find my model and I'm going to double click it there and label it something character model, just something that you know that works for you. I'm going to go up to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and I'm going to go to Edit, Delete All by Type History. And that's just how I set my model up when I'm starting. Turn it around, make sure that it's on the origin, meaning its legs are in the right place. I'm going to press spacebar and I'm going to drag down so I have just two viewports. One of them I'm going to make the front and the other one I'm going to make the side. I'm going to go to shading at the top of the viewport and make sure that X-ray joints is selected in both cases. And then I'm going to go up to the top and make sure I'm in my rigging menu. I'm going to go to skeleton, create joints, and I'm going to make my first joint chain starting at the hip, going down to the foot in the left viewport. And I'm going to go to my outliner and I'm going to press shift and expand that joint chain and I'm going to go down and label all of these things. So I'll call it capital L in front of each hip, knee, ankle, foot, and I'm going to put a capital L and you'll see why in a few minutes when we mirror the joint chain. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my left viewport and I'm going to just click and make a new joint, and that's the root joint. I'm going to drag that right to the center of the pelvis and I'm going to double click on it in the outliner and call it root. I'm going to grab my original joint chain, move it over into place, and I'm going to shift select the root and press P, and that will parent it to the root. Then I'm going to select that from the top, go to skeleton, mirror joints, open up the option box. It should be set as it is right now. Search for L, replace with R, and mirror. And that will mirror it over, and all the new ones will be the same name with R for right foot. I'm going to go back into my left viewport, and I'm going to click up the model, and I'm going to make a joint chain for the spine. Similarly, I'm going to go back into my outliner, I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to label each one of these joints something that makes sense. So it could be the lumbar spine, it could be the center spine, whatever works for you. Just make sure that you recognize the name in relation to what the joint is. Okay, so after I've done this, I'm going to go back into my front view, and in this case I'm going to turn on snap to grid. You don't have to do this, but I'm doing it just to be a little bit safer, and what this does is this is going to make my joint chain absolutely perfect. It'll make it perfectly aligned. I'm going to turn snap back off, and I've made these joints, and I'm going to move them, make sure I turn snap back off, go back there again, and I'm going to move that into place into the arm. I'm going to press space bar here in a minute, and well, I'm going to line up these joints here first, and then I'll press space bar and go into perspective mode, perspective view I should say, where we're going to adjust it. So going up into this, I pressed F when it was selected to zoom right up on it, and I'm going to grab that joint chain at the end and move it into place. And you try to move these things as little as possible. Moving them a little bit's okay, actually. And I'm going to go back into my outliner and label these things in accordance to what they are as well. Also, just a few little notes. It's good to put a little bit of an angle in knees and arms, especially legs, because when you have an IK, inverse kinematic, which we're going to do coming up, it helps Maya know which way the joint is going to bend initially. You can do it other ways, but that's a quick little thing. Just put in a little bit of a bend. Oh, messed up down there. Let's go back and try that again and label that joint correctly. There we go. And I'm not doing hands. We're keeping this a very simple rig in this case. So I'm going to select that joint chain, shift select the spine and press P, and that will parent it. Select lower spine, shift select the root, press P. Try that again, shift select, press P. And it's all parented. I'm going to grab that one. I'm going to go to skeleton, mirror joints, and that it's already set, and it just mirrored it. Now we've got a skeleton. Once again, this is not a rig. This is the beginning of a rig. Okay, so something I want to talk about real quick is ways that you can adjust the joints manually. So I'm going to go up to these little boxes here and click on this, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes. So the first one is select by component type, or you can press F8 and it changes the selection mode to a component, which is like a sub-object. The next one is select miscellaneous components. Make sure that you have these things selected, and this will enable you so that you can select the individual joints and move them as needed. So here I'm going to show you, now it's in kind of a sub-object mode, and I drag select that, and I can turn my joints any which way I want. In this particular case, you would not want your joint to be set this way, but I'm just doing this just so you can see how it is. So you can go in and manually adjust your joints, and the orientation, as you'll see in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it back to the object mode here, and watch when I turn that. That is a wonky joint. You don't want it set that way, but I'm just showing you how to orient it. But if you make your joint chains, if it's a T-pose and you're making them in the viewport, you're going to be fine. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is orienting joints. And if you look at this, you see that little red, green, and blue X, Y, and Z. I changed that so you can see them a little more clearly. And if you go up to skeleton up here and you go to orient joint, you're going to see that there's an option to orient your joint. So I'm going to open up the option box here. In this case, I'm going to orient them to the world. You wouldn't want to do this, but it'll show you the change. But you can go in here and you can set them to, if you want your axis to be a Y and X going down. X running down the joint makes an awful lot of sense typically, but as long as your joint trains are straight for our purposes, you're going to be fine. Okay, setting up forward kinematics controllers. We're going to be actually starting out with a couple IK controllers, and I'll detail this as we go through. So we're going to do inverse kinematics on the legs, and we're going to go to Create, NURBS Primitives, Circle. And I'm just going to draw a little circle down here, and I'm going to press W, and I'm going to press V to turn on snap to point. I'm going to snap it right to my character's ankle here. And I'm going to press Control D, and then do the same thing to snap it over to the other side. Now I need to make sure that, well, we're going to move this up here to the root as well. Probably press R and scale it out just a little bit. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the same thing for all of these. I'm going to press Control D to duplicate it, make sure the snap is on, and I'm snapping them to the joints. And each one of our joints is going to get a controller here. And these are what's called forward kinematics. So a forward kinematics controller, I'll just talk as I'm doing this repeat process in all of these. A forward kinematics is when you turn the controller, it's going to turn the joint, and all the joints that go in front of it on the chain are going to follow. And that's what you do for things like elbows, wrists, things like that. Most of this model is going to be a forward kinematic model. We're going to have inverse kinematics on the legs. In a more complicated rig, doing more complicated things than you guys are probably going to be doing, you would want the ability to switch between these. So a lot of really advanced models, they're going to have a switch that you can animate so the character can switch between forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. And this would come in handy if the character is doing a flip, for example. So if the character does a flip, you can certainly do that with this rig, but it's going to be a lot easier if you could just suddenly say, I want those legs to be forward kinematics when he's in the air, so the legs are just going to follow along with the model. Once again, don't worry about that. Just take that as an FYI and do a little bit of homework on your own to learn about that. So I'm pressing Control D here. I've got snap, and I'm just duplicating these things all around. Now, in a more complicated model, these controllers will also be oriented perfectly to the joints as well. They're not here. But because these joints are straight, it's going to be so close. Once again, this is a basic rig. It's going to be so close that in all honesty, it's not going to matter all that much. So I'm going to select them all, go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, Edit, Delete All by Type, History. You're going to want those controllers zeroed out. That is really, really important. So following this process, we're going to set up inverse kinematics for the legs. So I'm going to go back to my skeleton menu here, and I'm going to go Create IK Handle. And I'm going to click on the hip joint, and I'm going to click down to the ankle, and that's going to build a joint chain, an IK chain between the hip and the ankle. And you don't need to change the options on this at all, just make an IK handle the way I just did from that menu. Skeleton create IK handle. Click down to the bottom, and I'm going to label these things as I do with everything. We're going to say L leg IK, R leg IK. And I'm just going to fast forward this real quick. I'm going to want to make sure that all my controllers are labeled. So we're just kind of going fast forward through, obviously, and just make sure that all your controllers and everything is labeled at all times. That's going to be really, really important. And then following this, we're going to talk about setting up the IK. So the IK is you're going to be grabbing that handle down by the ankle, and when you pull that handle, the whole leg is going to go. And the other really important part about this is when you do a walk or a run, when you push the character down, the legs aren't going to go through the ground, and it's going to be way, way easier for you. So IK for legs, for runs and walks is a necessity. The first thing we're going to do is select the new controller for the foot. Select the controller first, and the order in which you do this is absolutely critical. Okay, so with that controller selected, we're going to hold down Shift and select the IK handle, go to the Constrain menu, go to Point, open up the option box, make sure Maintain Offset is on, and hit Apply. I'm going to repeat the process over here. First, select the controller, then select the handle, make sure Maintain Offset is on, and make a new point constraint. I'm going to run a quick test here. We're going to grab the root joint and pull it up and down, and you can see those legs are now stopping. So when they hit the ground, they're going to stop, and trust me, that's going to help you a lot with this. We're going to do the same thing for an orient constraint, so I'm going to select, we're going to turn this off here, and we're going to open up the orient box, constrain orient, open up the option box, make sure maintain offset is on, select the controller first, then select the joint. Go to apply. Select the controller first, shift select the joint, hit apply, make sure maintain offset is on. Now you've got a point constraint and you've got an orient constraint so you can turn this thing. So what's going to happen, we're going to run a few tests here. I'm going to pull it up and down. You no longer see the legs, the feet moving when you do that, which is what you want. I can pull it up and I can turn that ankle now as well. So this is exactly what we're going to want for a lot of the animations that we're going to do for a game. So the next step is I'm going to go to Create, NURBS Primitives, Circle, and I'm going to make another circle here. And I'm going to move it up to the knee by pressing V just to snap it to that point, snap it to that knee. And I'm going to turn it a little bit. I'll turn off my snap, and I'm going to turn it, look over at my channel box here, and I'm going to set Rotate X to 90. So it's perfect. Doesn't really matter that much. You can make fancy controllers. I'm just using NURB circles here. We're going to snap it, and I'm going to move these things, what would be the model equivalent of about maybe a foot in front of them. And I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, Edit, Delete by Type History. And that's going to be an important thing with any controller. I'm going to call these things left knee controller and right R knee controller. Make sure you're consistent with your naming. And what this is going to do is these things, I'm going to make a pull vector. So I'm going to select this, the new controller, then select the IK. The order is really important. Constrain pull vector. You can open the option box, but there's really not a lot of options on these. Hit apply, select the controller first, then select the IK handle, hit apply for pull vector. And what this is going to do is it will allow you to control the knee. So when you have an IK joint chain, you can't control the things that are in between. So you're going to have to make what's called a pull vector here. So you can turn that IK handle, and in doing so, also turn the knee. You will really see that as you start to animate. It's if you don't have pull vectors or control of your knees, you're going to have problems. I'm going to select my model, hold shift and select the root, which will select all the bones. Go to skin, bind skin, and now my model will be bound to the bones. I'm going to grab that root joint and pull the model up and down a little bit, just run some quick tests on it. I'm going to grab those pull vectors, move them off to the left and right, just check that the knees are working, and I'm going to grab, one of the feet controllers, turn it a little bit, the orient constraint is working, pull it is, just see if everything is working. So test your model. We're not checking skin weights yet, but we're just testing things out. So at this point now we're going to set up forward kinematics controllers, starting with the root. I'll select the controller first, shift select the joint, the root joint, and I'm going to go up to my constrain menu and I'm going to go to point, and I'm going to open up that option box, make sure maintain offset is on, and hit apply. And then I'm going to go constrain, orient, open up that option box, make sure maintain offset is on, and hit apply. Now when I grab this controller here and move it around like this, you can see that joint is now following that controller. Likewise, when I turn it, it's going to rotate the model. But you can see those other ones aren't following yet because they're not hooked up. So I'm going to set up orient constraints for these. I'm going to select the controller first, hold shift and select that joint and go to orient. And make sure maintain offset is on. And I'm going to do this for each one. Turn it, but you can see those ones above are not following yet. So I'm going to select that controller, shift select the joint, press apply with maintain offset on. I'm going to select the controller, shift select the joint, and I'm going to keep repeating this process for each one. Every one of these needs to have an orient constraint on it. So that's telling Maya, hey, these things are going to turn these joints, these controllers. You are not going to animate by grabbing the joints, you're going to animate by grabbing the controllers. The joints are actually going to be hidden on your model ultimately. So we're just repeating this process for everything. And then following this, we're going to parent these controllers to each other. And parenting and child means the child will follow the parent. So we'll talk about this in about 2 seconds. So I've got this last orient constraint on. Now, I'm going to select the controllers, the one that I want is a child, then select the one I want to be the parent and press P. So select this one here, shift select this one and press P. Now that one below, when I move it, the one above is going to follow it. So I want that to be the child of that. Press P. I want this to be the child of this, so press P, so you're holding shift so you can select them. Now the order in which you do this is absolutely critical. The first one that you select will be the child. The second one that you select will be the parent. So you select one controller like this, then you press shift and select the other one and press P. And you repeat this process however you want this to be. So these things are going to be following whatever object you have here, controlling it. So now, when I go in and test this, when I grab this and I turn them around, you can see they're all following nicely. They're all parented. And that's a hierarchy. So I'm running a few tests here just to see if everything is okay, and it looks like it is. There are a lot of ways of doing this. This is the way that I like to work. This is a simple rig. This will work for a T-pose. If we had an IK chain, it wouldn't be quite as effective. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up, we're going to go down to our layers menu, which is by default on the right. I believe you can also access it through window layers. I'm going to select my model, and I'm going to make a new layer by pressing that button that you saw me just press, and I'm going to call it character. You got to put an underscore, and I do this actually twice. I mess it up. And now I've got a layer for that character model. I'm going to select the joints, and I'm also going to go down and I'm going to select the IK handles right here. So anything that you don't want showing, which in this case will be the IK handles and the joints, and with those selected, I'm going to go to that little icon right there with a dot on it and make a new layer with all these things on it. I'm going to double click that, and I'll call this like skeleton and IK. And I remember I forgot to put in the underscore. Maya won't let you do it, so it'll give me a little error message in a minute. But you'll see why in a second. So okay, there's my little error message. Okay, Maya, I understand. Let's go in and we'll just put the underscore in, not a problem. And Maya will let us do it. Okay, so hit save. Now what this is going to do is I've got these for a few reasons. This one here, I could turn off the visibility, and now all my skeleton and my IK are not visible. With this, if I select this and I click on that and set it to R, what's a little r, I can no longer select the model. And that's going to be really important because now you can just grab the controllers and you don't have to worry about the model being selected along with it. It's nice and clean. And if you ever want to select your model, which we are in a few minutes, you just go back into the layer there and you just click off that R and you can get right back to selecting your model again. So you're actually going to see right here, when I move this, you can see that weird deformation in that elbow. And we're going to have to get to fixing the skin weights, which is the next part that we're going to talk about here. Okay, so fixing skin weights. Skin weights are when you bind the skin to the skeleton, Maya's going to do its best to put it in the right place, but it doesn't always know. It's a computer, so you're going to have to go in and manually tell it sometimes which verts you want to be where. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to go down to if I scroll down here, I'm going to go and turn off that R in my channel box so I can select my model here. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes, but I want to show you the problem first. So I'll turn on my texture for my model, and I'm going to turn the character's head here. And you'll see something really pretty bad happen as I do this. So it looks really weird. Look what it did. It completely deformed it. It made everything warp as I did it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to press S, set a key, go down in my timeline, and turn the head, and if you have auto key selected on the lower right, it will set another key, or you can press S to set a key again. Now, that model, that head, obviously isn't working. That's a major problem. So we're going to have to fix this. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to select my model, hold my right mouse button, go to Paint Skin Weights tool, and this opens up an option box. Now this is why I have these things labeled this way. I went down, I selected head. I'm going to go down, turn my value up to 1 and turn on add. And you can press B to make your cursor go larger. And I'm going to work on the character's left side, our right here, but the character's left side here. And I'm going to just paint these weights up. I'm working on the left side for a reason, because when I mirror weights, by default, it just kind of works that way. You'll see in a few minutes. So I'm painting these things, just painting and adding weight to the model. And I'm going to smooth it out a little bit down here, smooth it. And these are just options that you can use. That white says that this is weighted to that bone. I'm going to go to mirror skin weights, and it mirrors it over to the other side. Now I'm going to go back into my model again and turn it, and you can see it works. It's a lot better. Obviously this is a quick demo, so it could use more refining, but it's definitely working. And you just repeat this process for the whole thing. I will set these keys. I'm going to hold shift, drag over the keys, and hit delete. Now they're gone. So I'm going to try the same thing for this. I'm going to press S and set a hotkey for it. So we'll press S. I'm going to move down in my timeline, and I'm going to move it, turn it. And you can either press S, or if you have auto key selected, it will automatically set a key. And there's a problem right there. So I'm going to select my model, right mouse button, paint skin weights tool. And if I labeled my joints correctly, it shouldn't be too hard to find it. There it is, L elbow. Turn on add, and I'm going to just paint out my skin weights on it and fix it. So we're just painting these skin weights, making sure that everything is fine. I can smooth it out, but as I move it now, it looks like everything is moving okay. Now we'll just talk one last time about this. Let's say hypothetically you wanted to take skin weight away. Here's how you can do it. You can turn your value down to 0. You can set it to replace, and then if you paint on your model, this isn't going to be something you want to do here, but you can see how it works. You can actually take skin weights away from things at this point. So there I am. I'm just painting away and removing my skin weight. So now obviously like that looks really messed up, but that's how you take them away. So to add them back, just go to add, turn value up to 1, and I'm just going to paint right on the model, and boom, you can paint them right back. So that should give you a little overview of skin weights. There's a lot of things you can do. You can see there's a color ramp, all kinds of different software has different ways, but this is the basic principle of this. So once again, if I want to take that out, there I am doing replace. And this should give you a little overview of what basic skin weight painting is. Now, the last little piece of advice that I would give is with joints, they're going to be like anything. So you can rotate them. That's how we typically think about joints, but you can translate them, just pull them around. And sometimes you're actually going to want to do that. With a lot of rigs, having a nice little squash and stretch is great. You can even you can scale them. But if you don't want to do that, what you do is you go up to your channel box, select the attributes that you want not to do, and you select them and you say lock and hide selected. And that will make, in the channel box, that'll make, now if you go to that particular one, so you've only got those three available. So just one last little cleanup thing.